The wind howled like a living thing through the gaps in the old cabin's walls, carrying with it the promise of the worst Christmas blizzard Montana had seen in 50 years. Inside the cramped, freezing structure, 8 children huddled together for warmth while their stepfather Benjamin Crawford counted the meager coins in his whiskey bottle fund, completely indifferent to their suffering. What these children didn't know was that 20 miles away, a former Navy SEAL turned mountain rescue specialist named Jake Morrison was preparing for what would become the most important mission of his life, one that would transform not just Christmas Eve, but the destiny of an entire family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first snowflakes had begun falling 3 days before Christmas Eve, innocent enough that 12-year-old Emma Patterson barely noticed them as she chopped firewood. Behind the ramshackle cabin that had become their prison, her younger siblings, twins, Lucy and David, age 10, Marcus, 8, little Sophia, 6, baby-faced Tommy, 5, quiet Rachel, 9, and 7-year-old Samuel were scattered throughout the one-room structure, each trying to stay invisible and avoid drawing Benjamin Crawford's attention. Emma had become the unofficial mother to her 7 younger siblings since their real parents died in a car accident 18 months ago. Their mother's second husband, Benjamin, had seemed kind enough during the brief courtship, but his true nature emerged once the inheritance money ran out, and he found himself responsible for 8 children he never wanted. The remote cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, which he'd inherited from a relative, became their isolated home, far from social workers, concerned neighbors, or anyone who might question his treatment of the children. The cabin itself was a testament to neglect and barely controlled cruelty. Originally built as a hunting lodge in the 1940s, it had never been properly winterized. Gaps between the logs allowed wind and snow to creep inside, and the ancient wood stove struggled to heat even a quarter of the space. Benjamin had sold most of the furniture months ago, leaving the children with thin mattresses on the floor and a few broken chairs. The single window was cracked, covered with cardboard and duct tape that did little to keep out the Montana cold. Emma's breath formed clouds as she worked, her thin jacket providing almost no protection against the dropping temperature. She had learned to split wood the hard way, through trial and error, after Benjamin declared that earning your keep was the only way to justify their existence. Her hands, already rough and callous from months of hard labor, gripped the axe handle with practiced determination. Each swing sent vibrations up her arms, but she pushed through the discomfort, knowing that warmth for her siblings depended on her success. Inside the cabin, 9-year-old Rachel sat in the corner with baby Tommy on her lap, quietly humming Christmas carols to keep him calm. Rachel had always been the family's peacekeeper, the one who could sense tension before it exploded and somehow deflect Benjamin's anger towards safer targets, usually herself. She had learned to read his moods like a weather system, recognizing the signs that preceded his violent outbursts. Today, those signs were everywhere. Benjamin Crawford sat at the broken kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon at his elbow, studying a crumpled letter from the county social services department. The letter, which had arrived 2 weeks ago, informed him that a routine check-in visit was scheduled for the day after Christmas. The timing couldn't have been worse. His money was nearly gone. The children looked undernourished and neglected, and the cabin's condition would raise immediate red flags with any competent social worker. Emma, Benjamin's voice cut through the wind noise, harsh and demanding. "Get in here, now." Emma set down the axe and hurried inside, brushing snow from her shoulders. She had learned to respond immediately to Benjamin's summons. Hesitation only made things worse. Her siblings watched nervously as she approached the table where their stepfather sat glowering. "This place is a mess," Benjamin snarled, gesturing around the cabin with his bottle. "Social services is coming in 3 days, and if they see this dump looking like this, they'll take you all away. Then where will I be?" Emma bit back the response that sprang to her lips. That being taken away might be the best thing that could happen to them. Instead, she nodded respectfully and asked, "What would you like us to do?" Benjamin's laugh was bitter and humorless. Clean this place up. Make it look like a real home. And figure out how to make it look like I'm not starving you, even though there's barely enough food for 2 days." He took a long drink from his bottle and fixed Emma with a stare that made her stomach clench. "If those social workers decide I'm not fit to care for you, they'll split you all up, send you to different foster homes. You'll never see each other again." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Emma's siblings had heard variations of this warning countless times, and Benjamin knew exactly how effective it was. The children's greatest fear wasn't Benjamin's cruelty, it was being separated from each other. They had already lost their parents. Losing each other would be devastating beyond imagination. Outside, the wind picked up dramatically, and the first serious wave of snow began pelting against the cabin's walls. The weather forecast, which Benjamin had been monitoring obsessively, predicted that the Christmas Eve blizzard would be a historic storm, potentially dropping 4 feet of snow and creating whiteout conditions that could last for days. 8-year-old Marcus pressed his face against the cardboard-covered window, trying to peer through a small gap at the increasing snowfall. "Emma," he whispered, "it's coming down really hard now." Emma joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she saw the intensity of the storm. The trees surrounding their cabin were already heavy with snow, and visibility was dropping rapidly. She had been hoping against hope that the storm predictions were wrong, that somehow they might still have a chance to walk the 20 miles to town if things got really bad. But looking at the swirling white chaos outside, she realized they were truly trapped. Benjamin noticed their concern and laughed mockingly. "Scared of a little snow? Good. Maybe it'll keep those social workers away long enough for me to figure out what to do with you." He stood unsteadily, the alcohol clearly affecting his balance. "Here's the deal. You have until the storm passes to turn this place into something that won't get me arrested. Clean everything. Organize what little food we have to make it look like more. And for God's sake, try to look healthy and happy when they show up." 10-year-old David, one of the twins, spoke up from his position near the stove. "Benjamin, we don't have enough food to last through a big storm," the radio said. "It might snow for 3 days straight." Benjamin's face darkened dangerously. "Don't you tell me what we do or don't have, boy. I'll manage the supplies. You just worry about not looking like the ungrateful little burdens you are." The children fell silent, recognizing the warning signs in Benjamin's voice and posture. Rachel automatically pulled Tommy closer, while Samuel scooted behind one of the broken chairs, making himself as small as possible. They had all learned to read Benjamin's moods, and right now, he was approaching the dangerous territory that usually led to someone getting hurt. Emma stepped forward slightly, positioning herself between Benjamin and her younger siblings. "We'll get everything cleaned up," she said calmly. "Just tell us what you want done first." Benjamin studied her face for a moment, and Emma forced herself to maintain eye contact despite the fear churning in her stomach. Finally, he nodded and waved dismissively toward the corner where they stored their few possessions. "Start by organizing that disaster. Make it look like we have actual belongings instead of trash. And see if you can do something about the smell." In here place reeks of desperation. As Benjamin returned to his bottle, Emma quietly began organizing her siblings. She had developed a system over the months for managing both the work and Benjamin's unpredictable temper. The key was keeping everyone busy and productive while staying alert for signs that their stepfather was escalating toward violence. "Lucy," she whispered to the other twin, "help me gather all our clothes and fold them neatly." "Marcus and Samuel, see if you can tighten some of those loose boards on the walls. Use the hammer carefully and quietly." "Rachel, you and Sophie organize our books and games." "David, help Tommy stack the firewood by the stove." The children moved into action with the practiced efficiency of a team that had learned to work together under pressure. They had developed their own methods for making their meager possessions look more substantial and organized than they really were. Emma had become expert at arranging their few sets of clothing to create the impression of adequate wardrobes, while the other children had learned to position their handful of books and toys to suggest a home where children's needs were considered and met. Outside, the storm continued to intensify. What had started as gentle snowfall was now a full-scale blizzard. with wind speeds that rattled the cabin's windows and sent snow swirling in through every gap and crack in the walls. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the ancient wood stove struggled to provide adequate heat for the space. Emma worked steadily, but her mind was racing with worry. Even if they managed to clean and organize the cabin to Benjamin's satisfaction, they were facing much more serious problems. Their food supplies were genuinely inadequate for 8 children and an adult, especially if they were trapped for several days. Benjamin had been drinking more heavily lately, which meant his judgment was even worse than usual. And most concerning of all, Emma had noticed that their stepfather seemed to be planning something he had been making mysterious phone calls and studying maps of the area with an intensity that made her nervous. As the afternoon wore on and the storm showed no signs of weakening, Emma found herself thinking about Christmas Eve. Traditions their family used to observe. Their parents had always made Christmas magical, even when money was tight. Their mother would tell stories about Santa Claus and Christmas miracles, while their father would read from the Bible about the birth of Jesus and the hope that came with it. This year, Christmas Eve would be just another day of survival, another test of their ability to stay together and protect each other. But Emma had not given up on the possibility of miracles, despite everything they had endured. Despite Benjamin's cruelty and their desperate circumstances, she still harbored a secret hope that somehow, some way, things would get better. She had been praying every night for months that someone would come to help them, that their situation would change, that Christmas might bring the miracle they so desperately needed. What Emma didn't know was that 20 miles away in the small town of Glacier Ridge, a man named Jake Morrison was monitoring the storm reports with growing concern. Jake, a former Navy SEAL who had returned from military service to establish a mountain rescue operation, had been tracking weather conditions throughout the region. His specialized training and local knowledge told him that this blizzard was going to be devastating, and he was already preparing for emergency rescue calls from isolated families who might find themselves in life-threatening situations. Jake had no idea that 8 children were trapped with an abusive stepfather in a remote cabin, fighting not just against the storm, but against despair itself. He had no way of knowing that his decision to prepare for emergency rescues would set in motion a chain of events that would transform Christmas Eve from a night of terror into a moment of genuine miracle. As darkness fell and the storm reached its full fury, Emma gathered her siblings round the struggling wood stove, sharing what little food they had and trying to keep spirits up with quiet stories and whispered plans for how they would handle the social services visit. She had no way of knowing that help was already being prepared, that the very storm that seemed to seal their fate was also creating the circumstances that would bring them salvation. The blizzard that trapped them was indeed going to change everything, but not in the way any of them expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 20 miles away in Glacier Ridge, Jake Morrison stood in his well-equipped rescue headquarters, studying multiple weather tracking systems with the focused intensity that had made him one of the Navy SEAL's most effective search and rescue specialists. The converted warehouse that served as his base of operations hummed with sophisticated communication equipment, GPS tracking systems, and emergency medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death in Montana's unforgiving wilderness. Jake's weathered hands moved across digital maps displaying real-time storm data, his steel-gray eyes tracking the massive blizzard system as it unleashed its full fury across the Bitterroot Mountains. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death multiple times and emerged stronger. His dark brown hair showed premature streaks of silver, earned during 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where he had specialized in extracting wounded soldiers from impossible situations. "This is going to be bad, Sarah," Jake said to his dispatcher and business partner, Sarah Chen, a former Air Force communications specialist who had joined his operation after her own military service ended. "We're looking at sustained winds, over 60 miles per hour, visibility near zero, and snowfall rates that could dump 6 feet in the next 18 hours. Sarah pulled up regional emergency protocols on her computer screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. I've already coordinated with county emergency services and the National Weather Service. They're declaring this a major disaster event. Problem is, most of our usual resources are either snowed in or dealing with emergencies closer to populated areas. Jake nodded grimly, understanding the implications. Mountain rescue operations during severe weather required split-second timing and flawless execution. Every minute of delay could mean the difference between bringing people home alive or recovering bodies after the storm passed. His specialized training had taught him to think systematically about worst-case scenarios. And right now, every instinct was telling him that people were going to die tonight unless someone was prepared to take extraordinary risks. Pull up the registry of remote properties in the storm zone, Jake instructed, his mind already shifting into operational mode. I want to identify every cabin, ranch, and isolated structure where people might be trapped. We need to prioritize based on family size, medical conditions, and structural integrity of buildings. As Sarah compiled the data, Jake methodically checked his emergency equipment. His custom-modified snowmobile could handle terrain that would stop conventional vehicles, equipped with GPS navigation systems that functioned in whiteout conditions, and emergency medical supplies sufficient for treating multiple casualties. His survival gear included enough food, water, and heating supplies to sustain a large group for several days if necessary. Meanwhile, back at the isolated cabin, Emma Patterson was discovering that their situation was deteriorating faster than she had feared. The ancient wood stove, which had been struggling to heat the space adequately, was now producing more smoke than heat. The chimney, partially blocked by snow and debris, was causing dangerous backdraft that filled the cabin with acrid smoke whenever the wind shifted. Emma, I can't breathe right, 6-year-old Sophia whispered, her small hand pressed against her chest as she tried to suppress a coughing fit. The little girl's asthma, which their parents had managed carefully with proper medication, had become a constant source of worry since Benjamin refused to pay for her prescription inhaler. Emma knelt beside her youngest sister, her own lungs burning from the smoky air. Try to breathe slowly, sweetheart, in through your nose, out through your mouth, just like Mom taught you. She looked around desperately for solutions, knowing that Sophia's condition could become life-threatening if the air quality continued to deteriorate. Benjamin Crawford, now well into his second bottle of bourbon, seemed oblivious to the crisis developing around him. He sat slumped in his broken chair, occasionally muttering about social workers and ungrateful children, while his stepchildren struggled with increasingly dangerous conditions. The combination of alcohol and his natural indifference to their welfare had created a situation where he was incapable of recognizing genuine emergencies, much less responding appropriately. The fire's dying down. 10-year-old David reported from his position beside the wood stove. And I think something's wrong with the chimney. Every time I add wood, more smoke comes into the room instead of going up. Emma felt her stomach clench as she realized the implications. Without adequate heat, they would face hypothermia within hours. The cabin's poor insulation meant that interior temperatures would drop rapidly once the fire went out, but continuing to burn wood with a blocked chimney could fill the space with carbon monoxide, creating an equally deadly threat. 7-year-old Samuel, always the most observant of the children, tugged on Emma's sleeve and pointed toward the corner, where they stored their meager food supplies. Emma, he whispered urgently, look at the wall behind the food boxes. Emma followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. Water was seeping through gaps in the logs, creating dark stains that indicated structural problems with the cabin's foundation. The moisture was already affecting their food stores, and if it continued, they would face the prospect of contaminated or spoiled supplies just when they needed them most. 9-year-old Rachel, who had been trying to keep baby Tommy calm, noticed Emma's expression and quietly moved closer. What should we do? She asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. Emma looked around at her siblings, seeing fear and trust in equal measure in their faces. At 12, she was barely more than a child herself, but circumstances had forced her to become their protector and decision-maker. The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, especially as she calculated the escalating dangers they faced: inadequate heat, compromised air quality, structural problems with their shelter, dwindling food supplies, and a guardian who was too intoxicated to help even if he wanted to. "We need to solve the chimney problem first," Emma decided, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "David, help me clear away some of the snow that might be blocking the top. Marcus and Samuel, see if you can find something to seal the worst gaps in the walls where water is coming in. Lucy, you and Rachel organize our food so we can protect it from moisture." The children moved into action with the quiet efficiency they had developed over months of managing crises without adult help. Emma pulled on her thin jacket and headed outside into the full fury of the blizzard, knowing that climbing onto the cabin's roof in these conditions was extremely dangerous, but understanding that they had no choice. The wind hit her like a physical blow, instantly numbing her exposed skin and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Snow swirled around her in chaotic patterns, and the temperature had dropped so dramatically that her breath froze almost instantly. The metal ladder that provided access to the roof was already coated with ice, making each step treacherous. As Emma climbed carefully toward the chimney, fighting wind gusts that threatened to tear her from the ladder, she found herself thinking about her parents and the Christmas traditions they would never share again. Her mother had always insisted that Christmas was about hope and miracles, about believing that good things could happen even in the darkest times. Right now, clinging to an icy ladder in the middle of a historic blizzard, Emma desperately needed to believe in those miracles. The chimney was indeed blocked, packed with a combination of snow, ice, and debris that had accumulated over weeks of neglect. Emma used her bare hands to clear what she could, ignoring the pain as the cold metal burned her skin. Each handful of debris she removed improved the situation slightly, but she could tell that the chimney would need professional repair to function properly. When she finally climbed back down and returned to the cabin, Emma found that her siblings had made remarkable progress despite the challenging conditions. David had managed to adjust the damper system to improve airflow, while Marcus and Samuel had used clothing and scraps of fabric to seal the worst gaps in the walls. The improvement in air quality was noticeable immediately, though the fundamental problems remained unsolved. Benjamin looked up from his bottle long enough to notice Emma's return. "Where the hell have you been?" he slurred, his words barely comprehensible. "I told you to clean this place up, not go wandering around outside." "I was fixing the chimney so we don't die from smoke inhalation," Emma replied quietly, too exhausted and worried to maintain her usual diplomatic approach. Benjamin's face darkened dangerously. "Don't you use that tone with me, girl. I don't care what you think you're doing. You follow my orders, not your own stupid ideas." The confrontation was interrupted by a sharp crack from outside, followed by a tremendous crash that shook the entire cabin. Through the cardboard-covered window, they could see that one of the large pine trees near the structure had fallen, its massive trunk missing the cabin by less than 10 feet. The fallen tree blocked what had been their primary escape route, effectively trapping them even more completely than before. "Jesus," Benjamin muttered, his alcoholic haze penetrating enough for him to recognize the seriousness of their situation. If that tree had hit the cabin, the implication hung in the air. They were now completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a deteriorating structure with inadequate supplies and a guardian who was too intoxicated to make rational decisions. Emma felt the weight of despair settling over her like a heavy blanket, but she forced herself to focus on immediate priorities. Back in Glacier Ridge, Jake Morrison was reviewing the latest weather updates with growing alarm. The storm had intensified beyond even the most pessimistic forecasts, creating conditions that made standard rescue operations nearly impossible. His years of military experience had taught him to expect the unexpected, but this blizzard was testing the limits of even his specialized capabilities. "Sarah, I'm getting reports of multiple emergencies throughout the region," Jake said, his voice tense with concentration. "Stranded motorists, collapsed roofs, people trapped without heat or power. We need to prioritize based on life-threatening situations. Sarah continued monitoring emergency communications, her headset crackling with distress calls from across the county. Jake, I'm hearing something troubling on the emergency scanner. There's been talk about a remote cabin in the Bitterroot area where someone reported seeing children, but social services hasn't been able to make contact. The property is registered to a Benjamin Crawford, but there's no current phone service to the location. Jake's military instincts immediately flagged the situation as potentially critical. Isolated families with children were always high priority during severe weather events, especially when communication had been lost. His experience had taught him that situations involving children could deteriorate rapidly, and delayed response often meant tragedy. Pull up everything you can find on that property, Jake instructed, his mind already shifting into mission planning mode. Geographic location, access routes, registered occupants, any social services history. If there are kids trapped out there, we need to reach them before the storm gets worse. As Sarah compiled the information, Jake began preparing for what could be the most challenging rescue of his career. The combination of extreme weather, remote location, and potential child welfare issues created a complex scenario that would require all of his specialized skills and equipment. But something deeper than professional duty was driving his sense of urgency, a feeling that lives hung in the balance and that time was running out faster than anyone realized. The storm that had begun as a weather event was rapidly becoming a life-or-death crisis for 8 children who had already endured more hardship than most adults could imagine. And 20 miles away, their unexpected salvation was preparing to venture into conditions that would challenge even a former Navy SEAL's legendary training and determination. Sarah Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up the digital files associated with Benjamin Crawford's property. What she discovered made her stomach drop. Jake, this doesn't look good. The property has been flagged by social services multiple times over the past 6 months. There are reports of suspected child neglect, but every time they've tried to conduct a welfare check, either the weather was too severe or Crawford claimed the children were visiting relatives. Jake studied the information appearing on Sarah's screen, his expression growing darker with each detail. The property was registered as a 40-acre plot with a single-story cabin built in 1943, originally designed as a seasonal hunting lodge with minimal winterization. More concerning were the social services notes indicating that 8 children, ranging in age from 5 to 12, were believed to be living on the property under the guardianship of their stepfather. Look at this, Sarah continued, pointing to a specific entry in the file. A mail carrier reported 3 weeks ago that he saw children outside the cabin in inadequate winter clothing, and that one of the older girls appeared to be doing heavy manual labor. When social services tried to follow up, Crawford told them the children were staying with relatives in Billings. Jake's military training had exposed him to situations involving endangered children, and he recognized the classic patterns of abuse and neglect, the remote location, the inconsistent stories. The reports of children in distress, everything pointed toward a serious situation that had been deteriorating for months. The blizzard hadn't created this crisis. It had simply made it life-threatening. What's the terrain like between here and their location? Jake asked, already mentally calculating the challenges involved in reaching the remote cabin. Sarah pulled up topographical maps and satellite imagery. It's rough country. The access road is a logging trail that was never designed for winter travel, and it crosses 3 creek beds that are probably impassable by now. The elevation gain is about 1,800 feet over 12 miles of switchback trails. In these conditions, it would be suicide for anyone except someone with specialized training and equipment. Jake finished. He had navigated worse terrain, under hostile fire in Afghanistan, but mountain rescue during a historic blizzard presented unique challenges that even his military experience hadn't fully prepared him for. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Emma was discovering that their situation had reached a critical tipping point. Baby Tommy, who had been quiet and lethargic for the past hour, was showing signs of hypothermia. His lips had taken on a bluish tint, and his small body was shivering uncontrollably, despite being wrapped in every available blanket. "Emma, something's wrong with Tommy," Rachel whispered urgently, her own voice shaking from cold and fear. "He's not responding when I talk to him, and his hands feel like ice." Emma knelt beside her youngest brother, her heart racing as she recognized the symptoms their mother had taught her to watch for. Tommy's breathing was shallow and rapid, his skin was pale and cold to the touch, and his usual bright personality had been replaced by a dangerous listlessness that indicated his body was beginning to shut down. "We need to get him warmer, fast," Emma said, trying to keep panic out of her voice. "David, is there any way to get more heat from the stove? Lucy, help me create a warm space using our bodies and all the blankets we have." The children worked together with desperate efficiency, creating a makeshift warming cocoon around Tommy while David struggled to coax more heat from the failing wood stove. But Emma could see that their efforts were barely adequate. The cabin's temperature was continuing to drop, and without proper heating, hypothermia would soon threaten all of them. 8-year-old Marcus, who had been monitoring their food situation, approached Emma with news that made their crisis even worse. "Emma, I need to show you something," he said quietly, leading her to the corner where they stored their supplies. What Marcus revealed made Emma's blood run cold. The water seepage she had noticed earlier had contaminated most of their remaining food. Canned goods were rusted and potentially dangerous, bread and crackers had become moldy, and their small supply of fresh vegetables had frozen and begun to rot. They were facing the prospect of starvation along with hypothermia. "How much food do we actually have left?" Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. Marcus counted carefully. "Maybe enough for 2 meals if we stretch it really thin. And that's only if we can figure out how to cook it safely with the stove problems." The mathematical reality was stark and terrifying. 8 children and 1 adult, trapped for potentially several days, with food for maybe 2 meals total. Even if they could solve the heating problem, they would face serious malnutrition within 48 hours. Benjamin Crawford, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the escalating crisis. His alcohol consumption had reached levels that left him barely conscious, slumped in his chair and mumbling incoherently about problems that seemed trivial compared to their actual situation. Occasionally he would rouse himself enough to shout orders or complaints, but he was clearly incapable of rational thought or helpful action. Emma found herself facing decisions that no 12-year-old should ever have to make. Every option seemed to lead toward disaster, and the weight of her siblings' survival rested entirely on her shoulders. She could attempt to venture outside for help, but the blizzard conditions made it nearly impossible to survive more than a few hundred yards from the cabin. She could try to ration their remaining food more strictly, but that would only delay starvation by a day or 2. Most terrifying of all, she could see that her siblings were beginning to lose hope, and she knew that despair could be as deadly as cold or hunger. Back in Glacier Ridge, Jake Morrison was making a decision that would have seemed reckless to anyone except someone with his unique background and training. Despite conditions that had grounded all aircraft and stopped conventional rescue vehicles, he was preparing to attempt a solo rescue mission into the heart of the blizzard. "Jake, this is insane," Sarah protested as she watched him load specialized winter survival gear onto his modified snowmobile. "The Weather Service is calling this the worst storm in 50 years, even with your training. The odds of reaching that cabin and getting back alive are—" "I know the odds," Jake replied calmly, his movements precise and methodical as he secured emergency medical supplies and enough food and heating materials to sustain a large group for several days. "But if there are 8 kids trapped out there with someone who can't or won't protect them, those kids are going to die tonight unless someone reaches them." Jake's decision wasn't based on heroic impulses or reckless bravery. His military experience had taught him to calculate risks objectively, and while the mission was extremely dangerous, he believed it was technically possible with the right equipment and approach. More importantly, his conscience wouldn't allow him to sit safely in town while children potentially died from neglect and exposure. His snowmobile had been extensively modified for extreme conditions, equipped with GPS navigation that functioned in zero visibility, emergency communications equipment, and specialized tracks that could handle terrain impossible for conventional vehicles. His survival gear included military-grade cold-weather clothing, enough food and water for a week, emergency medical supplies, and portable heating equipment that could warm a large space. "If I don't make contact within 12 hours, alert the National Guard and request emergency helicopter support as soon as weather permits." Jake instructed Sarah as he completed his preparations. "And monitor emergency frequencies if I find what I think I'm going to find out there. We may need to coordinate with Child Protective Services and medical evacuation." As Jake prepared to venture into the storm, Emma was gathering her siblings for what might be their final family meeting. Tommy's condition had stabilized slightly, but he remained dangerously cold and lethargic. Sophia's breathing difficulties were worsening, and all of the children were showing early signs of hypothermia and malnutrition. "I need everyone to listen carefully," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Our situation is very serious, but we've survived difficult times before, and we're going to survive this one too. We need to stay close together, share our body heat, and be very careful about how we use our remaining food and fuel." 9-year-old Rachel raised her hand tentatively. "Emma, what if Benjamin gets worse? What if he tries to hurt us when he's been drinking?" This much, the question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Emma had been worrying about the same thing, knowing that Benjamin's combination of alcohol abuse and increasing desperation could lead to violence. In their weakened condition, the children would be particularly vulnerable to adult aggression. "We'll watch out for each other," Emma said firmly. "If Benjamin becomes dangerous, we'll use the signals we practiced. Everyone stays calm, and we protect the little ones first." The children nodded solemnly, understanding that their survival depended on unity and careful planning. They had developed these emergency protocols over months of living with Benjamin's unpredictable behavior, but they had never faced a situation where their very lives hung in the balance outside. The blizzard reached a new level of intensity. Wind speeds exceeded 70 miles per hour, creating whiteout conditions that made it impossible to see beyond arm's length. The temperature had dropped to nearly 30 degrees below zero, and snow was accumulating at rates that threatened to bury the cabin entirely. Jake Morrison started his snowmobile and began his journey into conditions that would challenge every skill he had learned during years of military service. In hostile environments, his GPS indicated that the cabin was 12 miles away through terrain that would be treacherous even in good weather. In these conditions, it would be like navigating through a frozen hell where a single mistake could mean death. But as Jake fought his way through the first mile of the journey, battling wind that threatened to overturn his vehicle and snow that reduced visibility to zero, he found himself thinking about 8 children who were counting on a miracle they didn't even know was coming. The former Navy SEAL, who had rescued countless soldiers from impossible situations, was about to attempt the most important mission of his life. The storm that had begun as a weather event was now a race against time, with children's lives hanging in the balance and their salvation fighting through conditions that would stop anyone except someone with Jake Morrison's unique combination of skills, equipment, and absolute determination to succeed. The first 3 miles of Jake Morrison's journey tested every survival skill he had acquired during his military career. His modified snowmobile fought through drifts that reached above his waist, while hurricane-force winds threatened to tear him from the vehicle every few hundred yards. The GPS navigation system, designed to function in combat conditions, flickered between satellite signals as the storm interfered with electronic communications. Jake's military training had taught him to break impossible missions into manageable segments, focusing on immediate objectives rather than the overwhelming scope of the entire operation. Right now, his objective was simply reaching the first checkpoint, an abandoned ranger station that marked the halfway point to the Crawford property. If he could make it that far, he would reassess conditions and determine whether continuing was tactically sound or suicidally reckless. The terrain beneath the snow was treacherous even without the blizzard. Fallen logs, hidden boulders, and sudden elevation changes created obstacles that could destroy his snowmobile or cause fatal injuries if approached carelessly. Jake navigated by memory and instinct, using landmarks that were barely visible through the swirling snow to maintain his general direction toward the remote cabin dot at the 3-mile mark. Jake encountered his first serious crisis. A massive pine tree, weighted down by thousands of pounds of snow and ice, had fallen directly across the trail. The trunk was too large to go over and too wide to go around easily, forcing Jake to make a dangerous detour through virgin forest, where hidden obstacles could be lethal. Jake studied the terrain carefully, using techniques learned during mountain warfare training to identify the safest route through unmarked territory. The detour would add at least 30 minutes to his journey and consume precious fuel, but attempting to clear the fallen tree in these conditions would be even more time-consuming and dangerous. As he maneuvered his snowmobile through dense forest, fighting branches that threatened to snag his equipment and roots that could flip his vehicle, Jake found himself thinking about the children he was trying to reach. His military experience had exposed him to situations where civilian lives depended on split-second decisions and flawless execution. But something about this mission felt different, more personal, and urgent than even his combat rescues. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Emma was facing a crisis that threatened to destroy her family's unity and morale. Benjamin Crawford had awakened from his alcoholic stupor in a rage, furious about the cold, the noise of the storm, and what he perceived as the children's failure to solve their desperate situation. "This is all your fault," Benjamin screamed, his words slurred but his anger unmistakable. "You worthless little parasites can't do anything right, can't keep the fire going, can't keep the place warm, can't even stay quiet while I'm trying to sleep." The children pressed against the far wall of the cabin, instinctively seeking distance from Benjamin's explosive anger. Emma positioned herself between her stepfather and her siblings, her heart pounding, but her voice steady as she tried to de-escalate the situation. "Benjamin, we're all doing our best under difficult circumstances," Emma said carefully. "The storm is making everything harder, but we're working together to—" "Don't you dare lecture me, you little brat," Benjamin interrupted, stumbling toward her with violence in his eyes. "I'm sick of you acting like you're in charge around here. You're nothing but a burden I got stuck with when your mother died." The cruel words hit Emma like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her siblings were watching, and she knew that how she handled this confrontation would affect their ability to survive the next few critical hours. If Benjamin's rage escalated to physical violence, they would face immediate danger from someone who outweighed any of them by more than 100 pounds. 10-year-old David stepped forward slightly, his young face determined despite obvious fear. "Leave Emma alone," he said quietly. "She's been taking care of all of us. She's the only reason we're still alive." Benjamin's attention swung toward David with frightening intensity. "Did I ask for your opinion, boy? Maybe you need to learn some respect for adults who feed and house you." The situation was spiraling toward violence when 8-year-old Marcus inadvertently provided a distraction that probably saved David from serious injury. While trying to add wood to the struggling fire, Marcus accidentally knocked over a pot of melted snow water, sending it splashing across the floor and creating a loud crash that drew Benjamin's attention away from his intended victim. "Now look what you've done," Benjamin shouted, his rage redirecting toward Marcus. "Clumsy little idiot. Do you have any idea how hard it is to melt snow for water? Do you think water just appears by magic?" As Benjamin ranted about the spilled water, Emma quickly gathered her siblings into a tight group near the broken window, positioning them as far as possible from their stepfather's unpredictable movements. She had learned to recognize the signs that preceded Benjamin's most dangerous episodes, and right now, every indicator was pointing toward serious violence. "Everyone stay calm and quiet," Emma whispered to her siblings. "Let him wear himself out shouting. Don't argue, don't try to explain anything. Just wait for him to calm down or pass out again." But Benjamin's rage was fueled by more than just alcohol and frustration. The combination of isolation, desperation, and the growing realization that social services would soon discover his neglect had pushed him beyond rational thought. He was facing the prospect of criminal charges financial ruin, and social disgrace. And in his twisted thinking, the children were to blame for all of his problems. "You know what?" Benjamin said suddenly, his voice taking on a coldly calculating tone that was somehow more frightening than his screaming. "Maybe it would be better for everyone if social services found this place empty. When they finally show up, maybe I should just leave you here and let the storm take care of my problems." The threat hung in the air like poison. Emma felt her siblings press closer together, their fear palpable as they processed the implications of Benjamin's words. He wasn't just threatening to abandon them. He was contemplating leaving 8 children to die in a blizzard while he escaped to start a new life somewhere else. "You can't do that," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "People know we're here. If something happens to us, they'll know you were responsible." Benjamin laughed bitterly. "Will they? Storm this bad, anything could happen. Cabin could collapse, fire could go out, kids could get lost trying to find help. Tragic accidents happen all the time in weather like this." The children stared at their stepfather in horror, finally understanding that he was capable of abandoning them to die. Emma's mind raced as she calculated their options. If Benjamin left them without transportation or adequate supplies, their chances of survival would drop to nearly zero. But if he stayed in his current state of rage and alcohol-fueled paranoia, he might actively harm them before the storm ended. 7 miles away, Jake Morrison was discovering that the storm's intensity was increasing rather than diminishing. Weather reports had predicted that the blizzard would peak and then gradually weaken, but the reality on the ground suggested that the storm system was stalling over the mountains, creating conditions that could persist for another 12 to 18 hours. Jake had reached the abandoned ranger station that marked his halfway point, but the small building was completely buried under snow drifts. He used the structure as a windbreak to check his equipment and assess his physical condition. 3.5 hours of fighting through the storm had drained his energy reserves, more than he had anticipated, and he still faced the most difficult portion of the journey. The ranger station's emergency radio equipment was non-functional, buried under ice and debris, which meant Jake had no way to communicate with Sarah or request backup support. He was now completely on his own, committed to a mission that was becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. Jake studied his GPS readings and calculated the remaining distance to the Crawford property. 5 more miles through terrain that included decrepit crossings and a steep climb up Widow's Peak, a section of trail notorious for avalanches and sudden weather changes. In optimal conditions, the remaining journey would take about 90 minutes. In current conditions, it could take 3 hours or more if it was possible at all. But as Jake prepared to continue his journey, he thought about the social services files Sarah had discovered and the pattern of neglect and abuse they revealed. 8 children were trapped with someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to endanger their welfare. The storm hadn't created this crisis, it had simply made it life-threatening. Jake restarted his snowmobile and plunged back into the blizzard, fighting through conditions that would have stopped anyone without his specialized training and equipment. Each mile brought new challenges, hidden ravines that could swallow his vehicle, fallen trees that forced dangerous detours, and wind so powerful that it literally lifted his snowmobile off the ground at times. At the cabin, Emma was implementing emergency protocols she had hoped never to use, while Benjamin continued his alcohol-fueled rants about abandoning them to the storm. She quietly organized her siblings for the possibility that they might need to survive entirely on their own. "Rachel, take inventory of every piece of warm clothing we have," Emma whispered. "Lucy, help Tommy and Sophia gather into the warmest corner. David and Marcus, see if you can block more of the gaps in the walls using anything we can spare." The children moved with quiet efficiency, understanding that their survival might depend on preparations they made. While Benjamin was distracted by his own anger and paranoia, Emma had learned to think systematically about worst-case scenarios, and right now, the worst case was that Benjamin would follow through on his threat to abandon them. As the storm raged outside and Benjamin's threats grew more specific and frightening, Emma found herself praying for the miracle her mother had always promised would come when they needed it most. She had no way of knowing that 20 miles away, A former Navy SEAL was fighting through conditions that would stop conventional rescue operations, driven by a determination to reach children he had never met, but whose lives had become his most important mission. The blizzard that trapped them was about to become the delivery system for the Christmas miracle they desperately needed, though it would arrive in a form none of them could have imagined. Jake Morrison's snowmobile crested the final ridge before the Crawford property. Just as his fuel gauge dropped into the critical red zone, 7 hours of fighting through the most brutal conditions he had ever experienced had pushed both man and machine to their absolute limits. His military-grade cold-weather gear was coated with ice, his face mask had frozen to his skin, and every muscle in his body screamed from the constant battle against hurricane-force winds. Through the swirling snow, Jake caught his first glimpse of the cabin that had become his destination. What he saw made his blood run cold. The structure was barely visible, nearly buried under massive snow drifts, with only a thin wisp of smoke from the chimney indicating that anyone might still be alive inside. A massive fallen pine tree blocked what appeared to be the main access route, and the entire property looked like it had been abandoned to the fury of the storm. Jake killed the snowmobile's engine and listened carefully, using techniques learned during reconnaissance missions to assess the situation before approaching. Through the howling wind, he could hear something that made his stomach clench, the sound of a man's voice raised in anger, followed by what sounded like children crying or pleading. Moving with the stealth that had kept him alive during multiple combat deployments, Jake approached the cabin on foot, his specialized military boots finding purchase on the ice-covered ground. As he drew closer, the sounds from inside became clearer and more disturbing. An adult male was shouting profanities and threats, while children's voices responded with obvious fear and desperation. Jake positioned himself near the damaged window, where a gap in the cardboard covering allowed him to observe the scene inside. What he witnessed confirmed his worst fears and triggered every protective instinct he had developed during years of rescuing people from life-threatening situations. Inside the cabin, Benjamin Crawford was in the midst of a complete breakdown. He had discovered the children's emergency preparations and interpreted them as evidence of rebellion against his authority. In his alcohol-poisoned mind, their survival efforts had become proof that they were plotting against him, and his paranoia had escalated to dangerous levels. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Benjamin screamed at Emma, who stood protectively in front of her siblings. "Making plans behind my back, organizing like you're running some kind of conspiracy. Well, I've got news for you, I'm done with all of you." Benjamin stumbled toward a closet where he kept his winter gear, his movements unsteady, but his intentions terrifyingly clear. "I'm leaving, and you can figure out how to survive on your own. Maybe when they find your frozen bodies in the spring, people will understand what ungrateful little burdens you really are." Emma's voice remained steady despite her obvious terror. "Benjamin, please don't do this. The little ones will die if you leave us here. Tommy's already showing signs of hypothermia, and Sophia can barely breathe. We need adult help to survive until the storm passes." "Should have thought about that before you decided to turn against me," Benjamin snarled, pulling on his heavy coat with clumsy, intoxicated movements. "I'm done being responsible for other people's problems. Time for you to learn what the real world is like." Jake had heard enough. His military training included extensive instruction in domestic crisis intervention, and he recognized that Benjamin Crawford posed an immediate threat to 8 children's lives. The man was clearly intoxicated, paranoid, and preparing to abandon children to die in conditions that would kill them within hours. Jake checked his sidearm, a military-issue pistol that he carried for wilderness protection, and mentally reviewed the tactical approach that would best ensure the children's safety. His priority was neutralizing the threat Benjamin posed while avoiding any action that might traumatize the children further. The former Navy SEAL moved to the cabin's front door and knocked firmly, using a pattern that would clearly identify him as an outsider rather than someone the family might be expecting. The response from inside was immediate and dramatic. "Who the hell is that?" Benjamin shouted, his paranoia spiking at the unexpected sound. "Nobody could get through this storm. Kids, get away from that door." Jake used his most authoritative military voice, projecting calm competence through the cabin's walls. "This is Jake Morrison with Mountain Rescue Services. I'm responding to reports of people in distress at this location. I need to speak with." The adult in charge immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could hear whispered conversations inside, but no one approached the door. After 30 seconds, he tried again, this time addressing the children directly. "Kids, my name is Jake Morrison, and I'm here to help you. I have food, warm clothes, medical supplies, and everything we need to keep you safe until the storm passes. I need you to open the door so I can make sure everyone is okay." Emma's voice responded, carefully controlled but clearly hopeful. "Sir, we're okay, but we're having some problems with heating, and our stepfather he's not feeling well right now." Jake understood the diplomatic language Emma was trying to communicate their distress without directly challenging Benjamin's authority, probably because she feared his violent reaction. It was exactly the kind of careful word choice he had observed in other domestic crisis situations. "I understand," Jake replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm going to come inside now to check on everyone's welfare and help with your heating situation. This is a medical emergency, and I'm authorized to provide assistance whether or not anyone requests it." Benjamin's voice exploded from inside the cabin. "You stay the hell away from here. This is private property, and these kids are my responsibility. We don't need any help from outsiders." Jake had dealt with similar resistance during military operations where civilian authorities were unwilling to cooperate with rescue efforts. His training provided clear protocols for situations where children's lives were in immediate danger, and adult guardians were preventing necessary assistance. "Sir, I'm coming inside to assess the welfare of the minors at this location," Jake announced, his voice taking on the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to having his orders followed. "You can cooperate with this welfare check, or you can explain to federal authorities why you attempted to prevent emergency assistance." 2 children in life-threatening conditions. Jake tried the door handle and found it unlocked, a testament to how far from civilization they were. As he opened the door and stepped inside, the full scope of the crisis became immediately apparent. The cabin was brutally cold, filled with smoke from the malfunctioning stove, and obviously lacking adequate food or heating supplies. The 8 children were huddled together in a corner, their faces pale and their clothing inadequate for the conditions. But it was Benjamin Crawford who commanded Jake's immediate attention. The man was clearly intoxicated, holding an empty bottle in one hand and glaring at Jake with a combination of rage and fear that suggested unpredictable behavior. "Get out of my house," Benjamin screamed, advancing toward Jake with the bottle raised as an improvised weapon. "You have no right to be here. These kids are fine, and we don't need help from some government stormtrooper." Jake's military training took over automatically. He moved with practiced efficiency, using non-lethal restraint techniques to subdue Benjamin without causing permanent injury. Within seconds, the intoxicated man was on the ground, the bottle knocked from his hand, and Jake was in complete control of the situation. "Kids, I need everyone to stay calm," Jake said, his voice switching from authoritative to gentle as he addressed the children. "Your stepfather is going to sleep off his drinking, and I'm here to make sure everyone stays warm and safe until the storm passes." Emma stepped forward cautiously, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Are you really a rescue worker? Did someone send you to find us?" Jake looked at the 12-year-old girl, who had clearly been carrying responsibilities far beyond her years, and felt his heart break a little at the hope in her voice. "Yes, I'm really here to help. My name is Jake Morrison, and I specialize in mountain rescue operations. I brought food, medical supplies, heating equipment, and everything we need to get through this storm safely, for the first time in months." Emma allowed herself to believe that their nightmare might actually be ending. "Tommy's really sick," she said urgently, gesturing toward the 5-year-old who was wrapped in blankets but still shivering uncontrollably. "And Sophia has breathing problems that are getting worse, and we don't have enough food, and the chimney isn't working right, and hey." Jake interrupted gently, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "Take a deep breath. I'm here now, and we're going to fix all of those problems. you've done an amazing job taking care of your family under impossible conditions. But you don't have to carry that responsibility alone anymore." Jake moved quickly to address the most urgent medical needs. Tommy was indeed showing signs of moderate hypothermia, while Sophia's asthma symptoms were being aggravated by the smoky air. Jake's emergency medical kit included heating pads, advanced first aid supplies, and prescription medications that could address both conditions. "David and Marcus, I need you to help me unload supplies from my snowmobile," Jake said, organizing the children with the natural leadership that had made him effective during military operations. "Emma and Rachel, help me set up a proper warming station for Tommy and Sophia. Lucy and Samuel, see if you can find containers for the hot soup I'm going to prepare." The children responded to Jake's calm competence with visible relief, their movements becoming more energetic and hopeful as they realized that genuine help had finally arrived. For the first time in months, they were receiving adult protection and care from someone who actually wanted to help them, rather than someone who saw them as burdens. As Jake worked to stabilize their immediate situation, he used his satellite communication equipment to contact Sarah Chen back in Glacier Ridge. The children listened in amazement as Jake reported their condition and requested follow-up assistance from social services and medical professionals. "Sarah, I've located 8 children in critical condition due to neglect and exposure," Jake reported. "I need you to coordinate with county social services for emergency custody arrangements and medical evaluation as soon as weather permits evacuation." Jake's arrival had transformed their desperate situation in a matter of minutes. The children, who had been facing abandonment and possible death, were now under the protection of someone with the skills, equipment, and determination to ensure their survival and future welfare. The Christmas Eve miracle they had prayed for had arrived in the form of a former Navy SEAL who refused to let children suffer when he had the power to help them. Within the first hour of Jake Morrison's arrival, the atmosphere inside the cabin had transformed completely. The children, who had spent months walking on eggshells around Benjamin's unpredictable moods, were experiencing something they had almost forgotten existed: competent, caring adult supervision that prioritized their welfare above everything else. Jake worked with military precision to address each crisis systematically. His portable heating unit, powered by a compact generator he had brought on his snowmobile, was already raising the cabin's temperature to safe levels. The specialized device, originally designed for military field operations, could heat a space 3 times the cabin's size while running quietly enough not to disturb conversations. "Tommy, I need you to drink this warm soup very slowly," Jake instructed the 5-year-old, whose hypothermia symptoms were responding well to controlled rewarming. "Your body temperature is coming back to normal, but we need to be careful not to warm you up too quickly." Tommy nodded solemnly, his small hands wrapped around a military-grade thermal mug that held rich chicken broth from Jake's emergency supplies. The little boy's color was already improving, and his dangerous shivering had stopped as his core temperature stabilized. Meanwhile, Jake was addressing Sophia's breathing difficulties with a combination of medications from his medical kit and environmental modifications that reduced the irritants affecting her asthma. He had sealed the gaps around the malfunctioning chimney and activated an air filtration unit that was clearing the smoke-filled atmosphere. "Sophia, this inhaler should help open up your airways," Jake explained, showing the 6-year-old how to use the prescription medication he carried for respiratory emergencies. "And with the cleaner air, you should start breathing more easily within the next few minutes." Emma watched Jake work with a mixture of amazement and growing trust. After months of carrying adult responsibilities while still being a child herself, she was witnessing what competent adult care actually looked like. Jake's movements were confident and purposeful, his voice calm and reassuring, and most importantly, his attention was focused entirely on the children's needs rather than his own convenience or comfort. "Emma, you've done an incredible job keeping your family together under impossible circumstances," Jake said as he organized medical supplies. "I've worked with trained military personnel who couldn't have managed what you've accomplished here. But now I need you to help me understand exactly what's been happening so I can make sure we address every problem the request represented something Emma had never experienced: an adult asking for her input as a valuable source of information rather than dismissing her observations as childish complaints. Jake's respectful approach encouraged her to share details about their situation that she had been afraid to voice before. "Benjamin's been drinking more and more lately," Emma explained quietly, glancing toward the corner where their stepfather lay unconscious from alcohol and exhaustion. "And he's been talking about getting rid of us before social services comes to check on us. He said the storm might solve his problems for him." Jake's expression darkened as he processed the implications. His military experience had exposed him to various forms of cruelty, but the calculated abandonment of children to die from exposure represented a level of callousness that triggered his deepest protective instincts. "That's not going to happen," Jake said firmly. "Benjamin Crawford is never going to threaten any of you again. I've already contacted authorities, and when this storm passes, you'll all be placed in protective custody while permanent arrangements are made." 9-year-old Rachel, who had been listening carefully to the conversation, approached Jake with a question that revealed the depth of trauma the children had endured. "Mr. Morrison, does that mean we'll be split up and sent to different foster homes? Benjamin always said that if social services took us away, we'd never see each other again." Jake knelt down to Rachel's eye level, recognizing the fundamental fear that had kept the children trapped in their abusive situation. "Rachel, my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. There are laws that require social services to keep sibling groups together whenever possible, and I'm going to personally advocate for keeping your family intact." The promise seemed almost too good to believe after months of living with the constant threat of separation. David and Marcus exchanged hopeful glances, while Lucy unconsciously moved closer to her twin brother as if to protect their bond. "What happens right now?" the 8-year-old Marcus asked. "Do we have to stay here with Benjamin until the storm ends?" Jake was already implementing plans to address that concern. "Actually, I've brought enough equipment to establish a completely safe environment separate from Benjamin. We're going to set up a warming shelter in the cabin's back room, where you can all stay comfortable while I monitor Benjamin and maintain communication with rescue coordination." Jake's emergency supplies included modular shelter components that could create a secure, heated space within the existing structure. The military-grade equipment was designed for rapid deployment in hostile environments, and it would provide the children with both physical comfort and psychological security. As Jake worked to establish their temporary shelter, he engaged the children in age-appropriate tasks that helped them feel useful while keeping them safely occupied. Emma and David helped organize medical supplies, while the younger children sorted through the abundant food supplies Jake had brought. "Is this really all for us?" 7-year-old Samuel asked in wonder, examining packages of military meals ready to eat that contained more nutrition than the children had seen in weeks. "Every bit of it," Jake confirmed, "and there's enough for several days, plus emergency reserves in case the storm lasts longer than predicted. You'll never have to worry about going hungry again." The psychological impact of abundant food after months of rationing and uncertainty was profound. The children handled each package with reverence, and Jake could see them beginning to believe that their period of deprivation might actually be ending. Lucy, who had been quiet since Jake's arrival, finally approached him with a question that revealed her practical concerns. "Mr. Morrison, what's going to happen to us for Christmas? Today is Christmas Eve, and we don't have any presents or special food or anything like that." Jake paused in his equipment setup, struck by the poignancy of a 10-year-old girl worrying about Christmas traditions while recovering from life-threatening neglect. His military background hadn't prepared him for the emotional complexity of helping children who had been robbed of normal childhood experiences. "You know what, Lucy?" Jake said thoughtfully. "I think this Christmas is going to be very special. Just maybe not in the way you're used to. Sometimes the best gifts aren't things you can wrap in paper. They're things like safety, warmth, enough food to eat, and knowing that people care about you." Emma, who had been listening to the conversation, added her own perspective. "Mom always said that Christmas was about hope and new beginnings. Maybe this year, our new beginning is having someone who actually wants to help us." Jake felt his throat tighten at Emma's words. recognizing the wisdom and resilience she had developed through circumstances no child should face. "Your mom sounds like she was a very smart woman. And you're absolutely right, this Christmas represents a new beginning for all of you." As the evening progressed, Jake established routines that provided structure and security for the children, while maintaining vigilance over their unconscious stepfather. He organized sleeping arrangements that ensured everyone stayed warm and safe, prepared nutritious meals that began addressing months of inadequate nutrition, and most importantly, created an atmosphere where the children could begin to relax and behave like children rather than survival-focused adults. The transformation was remarkable. Within hours of Jake's arrival, the children were laughing, asking questions, and engaging in normal childhood behaviors that had been suppressed by months of fear and deprivation. Tommy was playing with small toys from Jake's emergency kit, while Sophia was breathing easily for the first time in weeks. "Mr. Morrison," Rachel said as Jake helped her settle into her sleeping bag, "are you really going to make sure we all stay together, even if it's hard to find someone who wants 8 kids?" Jake looked at the earnest 9-year-old and made a promise that surprised even him. "Rachel, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure your family stays together. And if the system can't find an appropriate placement for all 8 of you, I'll personally explore other options to ensure you're not separated." The promise carried weight that Jake himself was only beginning to understand. His rescue mission had started as a professional obligation to save lives in danger, but it was evolving into something much more personal and long-term. Meanwhile, Jake maintained regular communication with Sarah Chen, coordinating the complex logistics that would be required once weather-permitted evacuation. Social services, medical personnel, and law enforcement were all being briefed on the situation and preparing for immediate response. Once travel became possible, "Sarah, I need you to specifically research sibling placement protocols," Jake requested during one of his radio check-ins. "These kids have been through hell, and being separated would traumatize them further. I want options for keeping the entire family together, even if that requires non-traditional arrangements." Sarah's response revealed that Jake's request was more complex than standard foster care procedures typically allowed. "Jake, 8 children represent a major placement challenge. Most foster families aren't equipped for that many kids, and group homes typically separate siblings by age and gender. Then we need to think outside standard protocols," Jake replied firmly. "These children have proven they function as a family unit, with Emma providing natural leadership and the older kids helping care for the younger ones. Splitting them up would destroy something beautiful that they've built together." As Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day, Jake found himself thinking about the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had begun the evening as a single mountain rescue specialist, responding to a routine emergency call. Now he was deeply invested in the long-term welfare of 8 children, who had touched something in his heart that he hadn't known existed. The children slept peacefully for the first time in months, surrounded by warmth, adequate food, and most importantly, the presence of an adult who genuinely cared about their welfare. Their Christmas miracle had arrived not as a magical solution to all their problems, but as the beginning of hope for a future where they could thrive rather than merely survive. Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, with the historic blizzard finally exhausting itself after 36 hours of unprecedented fury. Jake Morrison stood at the cabin's repaired window, watching sunlight transform the snow-covered landscape into a crystal wonderland that sparkled like diamonds across the valley. The silence was profound after hours of howling wind, broken only by the gentle sounds of 8 children waking up to their first peaceful morning in months. Jake had maintained vigilance throughout the night, monitoring both the children's recovery and Benjamin Crawford's unconscious state. The man remained passed out from alcohol poisoning, his breathing steady, but his condition requiring medical attention that would need to wait until evacuation became possible. Jake had secured him safely, but kept him isolated from the children, ensuring their psychological recovery could continue without the threat of renewed trauma. "Mr. Morrison?" Emma's voice was soft and uncertain as she emerged from the warming shelter where the children had slept. "Is it really over? The storm, I mean?" Jake turned from the window with a smile that had become increasingly natural around these remarkable children. "The storm is definitely over, Emma. In fact, I just received word from my dispatch that helicopter evacuation will be possible within the next few hours. By this afternoon, you'll all be in warm, safe facilities with proper medical care and social services protection." The news should have brought pure joy, but Jake noticed a shadow of concern cross Emma's face. During their conversations the previous evening, she had revealed her deep fear that rescue might ultimately mean the destruction of her family through forced separation. "What exactly happens when the helicopter comes?" Emma asked carefully. "Do they take us all to the same place, or do they split us up right away?" Jake had spent much of the night on encrypted communications with Sarah Chen, coordinating not just immediate evacuation, but also advocacy for keeping the sibling group together. What he had learned about the system's typical approach to large sibling groups had strengthened his determination to ensure these children didn't face additional trauma through separation. "Emma, I've been working all night to arrange special circumstances for your family," Jake explained. "Instead of standard foster care placement, I've negotiated for you to be temporarily housed together at a specialized facility that handles large sibling groups. While permanent arrangements are determined." The relief in Emma's eyes was profound, but Jake could see she still harbored doubts based on months of broken promises from adults who were supposed to protect them. "Is that really possible? Benjamin always said that no one would want 8 kids, that we'd be too much trouble to keep together." "Benjamin was wrong about a lot of things," Jake said firmly. "There are people who specialize in helping families like yours, and more importantly, there are legal protections that prioritize keeping siblings together whenever possible. I'm personally going to make sure those protections are enforced." As the other children gradually awakened and joined their conversation, Jake found himself observing dynamics he hadn't fully appreciated the night before. Despite their young ages, these children had developed sophisticated systems for mutual support and care that demonstrated remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence. 10-year-old David automatically checked on 5-year-old Tommy's condition, while 9-year-old Rachel helped 6-year-old Sophia with morning breathing treatments using the inhaler Jake had provided. The twins, Lucy and David, worked together to organize breakfast preparation, while 8-year-old Marcus and 7-year-old Samuel collaborated on maintenance tasks. "Around their temporary shelter, you've created something really special here," Jake observed to Emma as they watched her siblings care for each other with practiced efficiency. "Most adults don't develop this level of teamwork and mutual responsibility. You've built a family that actually functions better than many biological families I've encountered." Emma blushed at the praise, but also revealed insight that surprised Jake with its maturity. "We had to learn to take care of each other because no one else would. But it wasn't just about surviving. We discovered that we're stronger together than any of us could be alone." The observation struck Jake deeply, resonating with his own military experience where unit cohesion often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. These children had essentially created their own elite unit, with specialized roles and unbreakable loyalty to each other. As Jake prepared Christmas breakfast using his emergency supplies, he found himself thinking about family structures and what actually constituted a successful household. His own upbringing had been conventional but emotionally distant, with parents who provided material needs while remaining largely absent from his emotional development. What he was witnessing among these children represented something far more meaningful: genuine care, mutual support, and emotional connections that had survived extreme adversity. "Mr. Morrison," Lucy asked as she helped distribute plates of warm food, "what's going to happen to Benjamin? Will he get in trouble for how he treated us?" Jake had been expecting this question and had prepared an age-appropriate response. "Benjamin is going to receive medical help for his drinking problem, and there will be legal consequences for how he failed to protect you. But most importantly, he'll never have the opportunity to hurt any of you again." 7-year-old Samuel, who had been the quietest of the children, surprised everyone by speaking up with unusual directness. "Good. He said mean things about our real parents, and he made Emma cry when he thought we weren't watching." The comment revealed layers of trauma that Jake was only beginning to understand. These children hadn't just endured physical neglect and deprivation, they had been subjected to psychological abuse that attacked their memories of their deceased parents and their sense of family identity. "Samuel, your real parents loved you very much, and nothing Benjamin said can change that," Jake said gently. "The way he treated all of you says nothing about who you are and everything about his own problems and failures." As the morning progressed, Jake continued coordinating evacuation logistics while observing the children's interactions. With growing admiration, Emma's leadership was natural and inclusive, never authoritarian, but always focused on the group's collective welfare. The younger children showed remarkable resilience and adaptability, while the middle children demonstrated problem-solving skills that exceeded their chronological ages. "Sarah, I need to discuss something with you privately," Jake said during one of his radio communications, moving to a location where the children couldn't overhear. "These kids aren't just survivors, they're an exceptional family unit that's developed remarkable capabilities through adversity. Standard foster care placement would be a tragedy that destroys something beautiful." Sarah's response revealed that she had been researching unconventional placement options since their conversations the previous evening. "Jake, I've been in contact with specialized agencies that handle complex sibling placements. There are options, but they require significant advocacy and sometimes creative solutions." "What kind of creative solutions?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew where the conversation was heading. "Well, there are provisions for qualified individuals to seek emergency custody of sibling groups when standard placements aren't available or appropriate. Someone with your background, financial stability, and demonstrated commitment to the children's welfare might be considered a viable option." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything Jake had assumed about his future. He had built his post-military life around independence, adventure, and the freedom to take risks that would be impossible with family responsibilities. The idea of becoming a guardian to 8 children represented a complete transformation of his personal goals and lifestyle. But as Jake looked at Emma helping Tommy with his breakfast, at Rachel teaching Sophia breathing exercises, at the twins collaborating on simple tasks with natural efficiency, he realized that his assumptions about what constituted a fulfilling life might need fundamental revision. "Sarah, what would that process actually involve?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the emotional tumult the suggestion had triggered. "Emergency custody can be granted within days if there's demonstrated need and qualified applicants," Sarah explained. "Permanent adoption would take longer and require extensive evaluation, but temporary custody could provide stability while all options are explored." Jake ended the radio communication and returned to the children, who were engaged in quiet conversations about their hopes and fears regarding the day's upcoming changes. He noticed that they automatically included him in their planning discussions, as if his continued presence in their lives was simply assumed. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said as Jake rejoined their group, "when we go to the new place, will you visit us sometimes to make sure we're okay?" The question revealed the depth of trust and attachment the children had developed toward Jake in less than 24 hours. They had been so starved for competent, caring adult attention that his professional rescue intervention had created emotional bonds that went far beyond standard emergency response relationships. "Marcus, I'm going to be involved in your lives for as long as you want me to be," Jake said, his voice carrying conviction that surprised even him. "You've all been through too much to face uncertainty about adult support. I'm committed to making sure you have advocates who will fight for what's best for your family." Emma looked at Jake with an expression that mixed gratitude with tentative hope. "Does that mean you might, could you possibly, would you consider being our family yourself?" The direct question forced Jake to confront the decision he had been avoiding since Sarah's suggestion. 8 pairs of eyes looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear, waiting for an answer that would shape all of their futures. Jake Morrison, the former Navy SEAL who had spent his adult life avoiding permanent commitments, found himself looking at 8 children who had somehow become the most important mission of his career. The Christmas miracle that had brought him to their rescue was about to become something far more transformative than any of them had imagined. The sound of helicopter rotors echoing through the mountain valley announced the arrival of the evacuation team that would transport the children to safety. Jake Morrison stood outside the cabin, watching the specialized medical helicopter navigate the challenging landing in deep snow, while behind him, 8 children prepared for a journey that would determine their future in ways none of them fully understood yet. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the lead physician on the evacuation team, approached Jake with a clipboard full of medical assessment forms and legal documentation. As the helicopter's engines wound down, she began her rapid evaluation of the situation with the professional efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency child welfare cases. Mr. Morrison, I understand you've been providing emergency care for 8 minors who were found in neglectful conditions, Dr. Hendricks said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had handled hundreds of similar cases. We need to conduct immediate medical evaluations and coordinate with social services for protective custody arrangements. Jake nodded, but something in his expression made Dr. Hendricks pause. Doctor, before we begin the standard protocols, I need to brief you on some unusual circumstances regarding this case. These children have developed exceptional resilience and family cohesion through their shared adversity. Standard separation protocols could cause significant psychological harm. Dr. Hendricks consulted her notes with a slight frown. Mr. Morrison, while I appreciate your concern, we have established procedures for handling large sibling groups. The children will be evaluated individually and placed according to their specific needs and available resources. That's exactly what I'm hoping we can avoid, Jake replied firmly. I've been in communication with specialized placement agencies, and there are alternatives that would keep the family intact while ensuring proper care. An evaluation. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's approach from the cabin, her hand holding Tommy's as she led her siblings toward the helicopter with the careful dignity that had characterized her leadership throughout their ordeal. Jake noticed that the children moved as a coordinated unit, with the older ones automatically positioned to protect and guide the younger ones. Dr. Hendricks, Emma said with remarkable composure for a 12-year-old addressing a medical authority figure, may I ask what's going to happen to my brothers and sisters? We've heard different things about whether we'll be allowed to stay together. Dr. Hendricks knelt down to Emma's eye level, her professional demeanor softening slightly at the girl's obvious maturity and concern. Emma, we're going to make sure everyone gets the medical care and safe housing they need. The exact arrangements will depend on what's available and what's determined to be best for each of you. Jake could see the fear flickering in Emma's eyes despite her brave front, and he felt his protective instincts surge. Dr. Hendricks, I've been researching emergency custody options that would allow me to serve as temporary guardian for the entire sibling group, while permanent arrangements are determined. The statement surprised Dr. Hendricks, who looked at Jake with new interest. Mr. Morrison, that's an unusual request. Emergency custody requires extensive background checks, financial stability documentation, and home studies that typically take weeks to complete. I understand the requirements, Jake replied, and I'm prepared to expedite the process through my military security clearance and professional references. Sarah Chen, my business partner, has already initiated the preliminary paperwork. Dr. Hendricks studied Jake's expression, clearly recognizing the depth of commitment behind his words. Mr. Morrison, are you fully aware of what you're proposing? 8 children represent an enormous responsibility, especially children who have experienced trauma and neglect. Before Jake could respond, 9-year-old Rachel approached with characteristic quiet observation. Dr. Hendricks, Mr. Morrison saved our lives, and he's been taking better care of us in 1 day than Benjamin did in over a year. We trust him. The simple statement, delivered with Rachel's natural sincerity, carried more weight than any formal character reference. Dr. Hendricks looked around at the other children, noting their obvious comfort with Jake's presence and their natural tendency to look to him for guidance and reassurance. This is highly irregular, Dr. Hendricks murmured, consulting her protocol's manual with obvious uncertainty. Standard procedure would be immediate placement in temporary foster care, while evaluations are conducted. Jake sensed the critical moment and drew upon his military experience. In negotiating complex situations under pressure, Dr. Hendricks, what if we could arrange for the children to be housed at my mountain rescue facility, which has dormitory-style accommodations and 24-hour medical monitoring capabilities? This would allow for proper evaluation while maintaining family cohesion. The suggestion represented a creative solution that addressed Dr. Hendricks' procedural concerns while meeting the children's emotional needs. Jake's rescue headquarters was indeed equipped with facilities designed to house multiple people during extended operations, and its medical capabilities exceeded those of many temporary foster placements. The facility would need to be inspected and approved by social services, Dr. Hendricks said slowly, clearly considering the proposal despite its departure from standard protocols. And you would need immediate approval for emergency custody, which requires judicial review. Emma had been listening to the conversation with growing hope, but she also demonstrated the practical thinking that had kept her family alive. Mr. Morrison, are you sure you want to do this? 8 kids is a lot of responsibility, and we come with a lot of problems that might be hard to handle. Jake looked at Emma with an expression that combined respect for her maturity with determination to prove her fears unfounded. Emma, over the past 24 hours, I've watched you and your siblings demonstrate more courage, loyalty, and resilience than most adults show in a lifetime. Taking care of you wouldn't be a burden, it would be an honor. 10-year-old David, who had been quietly observing the discussion, stepped forward with a question that revealed the children's own understanding of the magnitude of Jake's offer. Mr. Morrison, if you become our guardian, does that mean you'd be like our dad? Or would it be more like a really good babysitter? The question forced Jake to confront the emotional reality of had he was proposing. Emergency custody was one thing, but the children were asking about something deeper, whether he was prepared to become their family in the fullest sense of the word. David, if I become your guardian, it means I'm committed to being your family for as long as you'll have me, Jake said, his voice carrying conviction that surprised him with its certainty. Not a babysitter, not a temporary caretaker, but someone who cares about your future and wants to help you build the best lives possible. Dr. Hendricks had been making notes throughout the conversation, and her expression suggested she was beginning to see the situation from a perspective that prioritized the children's emotional welfare alongside their physical safety. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to contact Judge Patricia Walsh, who specializes in emergency custody cases. If she's willing to conduct an expedited hearing, we might be able to arrange temporary custody today. The possibility of immediate resolution created a surge of hope among the children, but Jake recognized the complexity of what was being proposed. Emergency custody would only be the beginning of a process that could ultimately lead to permanent adoption, a commitment that would transform every aspect of his life. There's something else we need to discuss, Dr. Hendricks continued, her tone becoming more serious. These children will require ongoing medical care, psychological counseling, educational assessments, and social services monitoring. Emergency custody means accepting responsibility for coordinating all of those services while providing a stable home environment. Jake had been considering these challenges since the previous evening's conversations with Sarah Chen. Dr. Hendricks, I've already begun coordination with specialists in trauma recovery, educational therapy, and pediatric medicine. My rescue operation has given me experience working with multiple agencies and managing complex logistics. 8-year-old Marcus, who had been listening intently to the adult conversation, approached with a concern that demonstrated the children's awareness of practical realities. Mr. Morrison, we don't have any of our stuffed clothes, books, toys, anything. And we don't have birth certificates or school records or any of the papers grown-ups always need. The observation highlighted another layer of complexity in the emergency custody process. Benjamin Crawford's neglect had extended to basic documentation and record-keeping, leaving the children without many of the legal documents that would be required for school enrollment, medical care, and other essential services. Marcus, that's exactly the kind of problem we can solve together, Jake assured him. Social services will help us reconstruct your records, and in the meantime, We'll make sure you have everything. You need to be comfortable and start catching up on schooling and other activities you've missed. Dr. Hendricks completed her initial medical assessments of each child, finding evidence of malnutrition and neglect, but no injuries requiring immediate hospitalization. Her evaluation supported Jake's observations about their remarkable resilience and the strong emotional bonds that had sustained them through months of adversity. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to recommend that Judge Walsh consider your emergency custody request, Dr. Hendricks announced after completing her documentation. These children clearly have exceptional trust in you, and their family cohesion suggests that separation would be traumatic rather than beneficial. The decision represented a professional endorsement that carried significant weight in custody proceedings. Dr. Hendricks had the experience to recognize both the children's unusual circumstances and Jake's genuine commitment to their welfare. As the helicopter prepared for departure, Jake found himself surrounded by 8 children who were looking at him with a mixture of hope, trust, and barely contained excitement. The rescue mission that had begun as a professional obligation to save lives in danger had evolved into the most important decision of his life. Kids, Jake said, gathering them around him as the helicopter engines started up again, we're about to begin a new adventure together. It won't always be easy, and there will be challenges we'll have to figure out as we go. But if you're willing to trust me, I'm committed to building a family with you that's based on love, respect, and helping each other become the best people we can be. Emma spoke for all of them when she stepped forward and hugged Jake with tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. Thank you for saving us, she whispered. Thank you for giving us a real family again. 6 months after that historic Christmas blizzard, Jake Morrison stood in the kitchen of his expanded mountain home, watching 8 children prepare for their first day. At Glacier Ridge Elementary School, the transformation in both the children and himself had been so profound that sometimes he could barely recognize the independent bachelor who had ventured into a storm to rescue strangers, only to discover his true calling as a father. The house itself reflected the magnitude of change that had occurred since that Christmas Eve rescue. What had been Jake's Spartan bachelor quarters had been completely renovated into a warm, bustling family home with bedrooms for each child, study areas equipped with computers and educational materials, and common spaces designed for the kind of large family activities that had become the rhythm of their daily life. Emma, can you help me with this math problem? Called 12-year-old Marcus from the dining room table, where several of the children were finishing breakfast while working on summer catch-up assignments. Despite being 8 years old, Marcus had demonstrated exceptional mathematical ability once he received proper nutrition and educational support. Emma, now 13 and blooming with confidence that came from security and encouragement, moved naturally into her teaching role. The girl who had been forced to carry adult responsibilities in a crisis had discovered that her leadership abilities flourished in an environment where she was supported rather than overwhelmed. Remember what Mr. Peterson taught us about breaking downward problems into smaller parts, Emma instructed patiently. What information do we know? What do we need to find out? And what mathematical operations will help us get there? Jake watched the interaction with pride that still surprised him with its intensity. The emergency custody that had begun as a desperate measure to keep the siblings together had evolved into legal adoption proceedings that would make their family permanent within the next few months. But more importantly, what had started as a rescue mission had become the most fulfilling period of his life. Dad, are you nervous about today? Asked David, now 11 and displaying the natural curiosity that had been suppressed during their months of survival-focused living. The use of Dad still sent a warm surge through Jake's chest, a daily reminder of the trust these children had placed in him. A little, Jake admitted honestly, a parenting approach he had adopted after learning that these children valued truth above false reassurance. Starting school is a big step for all of you, and I want to make sure you feel prepared and supported. The children had spent the summer in intensive educational therapy, working with specialists to address the academic gaps created by months of educational neglect. The results had been remarkable. Not only were they catching up to grade level, but several were demonstrating exceptional abilities that had been hidden. During their survival period, 9-year-old Rachel had revealed extraordinary artistic talent that was now being nurtured through private lessons and art therapy that helped her process trauma. While developing her gifts, 6-year-old Sophia's asthma had responded dramatically to proper medical care and a stress-free environment, allowing her natural athleticism to emerge through swimming lessons and gymnastics. "Dad, will you still be here when we get home from school?" asked 5-year-old Tommy, whose question revealed the depth of abandonment trauma that still occasionally surfaced despite months of security and consistency. Jake knelt down to Tommy's eye level, a gesture that had become automatic whenever the younger children needed reassurance. "Tommy, I'll be right here when you get home, just like I am every day. And you know what? I have a special surprise planned for after school to celebrate your first day." The promise of a surprise generated excitement among all the children, but Jake could see that his reassurance had accomplished its real purpose, reminding Tommy that he could count on consistent adult presence and care. It was a lesson all the children were still learning after months of unreliable and threatening adult supervision. 10-year-old Lucy, now thriving with confidence that came from proper nutrition and emotional support, approached with a question that demonstrated how their family dynamics had evolved. "Dad, can Samuel and I walk to school together? We've been practicing the rote, and we think we're ready to be more independent." The request represented exactly the kind of growth Jake had hoped to see. The children were learning to balance their strong family bonds with healthy individual development and age-appropriate independence. Their traumatic experiences had actually equipped them with exceptional judgment and safety awareness that made supervised independence possible earlier than typical for their ages. "I think that's a great idea," Jake agreed. "You've both demonstrated excellent responsibility and decision-making. Just remember our family safety protocols and text me when you arrive at school and when you start walking home." 7-year-old Samuel beamed at being included in the independence plan, his quiet personality having blossomed as he discovered that thoughtful observation was valued rather than overlooked in their household. The boy who had once hidden behind broken furniture to avoid Benjamin's attention now participated actively in family discussions and decision-making. The morning routine that had evolved in their household reflected Jake's military background adapted for family life. Everyone had specific responsibilities that contributed to the household's functioning, but the emphasis was on cooperation and mutual support rather than rigid hierarchy. The children had learned to take pride in contributing to their families' success rather than simply receiving care. "Okay, family meeting before school," Jake announced, a tradition they had established for handling important family business. The children gathered around the kitchen table with the practiced efficiency of a team that had learned to function effectively together. "Today marks 6 months since we became a family," Jake began, his voice carrying emotion that these children had taught him to express rather than suppress. "I want each of you to know how proud I am of the courage, kindness, and determination you've shown as we've built our life together." Emma raised her hand in the polite manner she had adopted for family meetings. "Dad, can we talk about the adoption finalization?" Mrs. Chen from Social Services said it should be completed soon. The adoption proceedings had been surprisingly smooth, aided by Dr. Hendrick's initial recommendation, the children's obvious thriving in Jake's care, and the family's exceptional functioning during the transition period. Judge Patricia Walsh, who had granted the emergency custody, had become an advocate for their unconventional but successful family structure. "The final hearing is scheduled for next month," Jake confirmed, "but I want you all to understand that, whether the legal paperwork is complete or not, you're my children and this is your permanent home. The adoption just makes official what's already true in our hearts." 12-year-old David, who had developed into the family's philosopher, offered his perspective on their transformation. "It's funny how the worst thing that ever happened to us being trapped in that blizzard with Benjamin ended up leading to the best thing that ever happened to us, finding our real family." The observation reflected wisdom beyond David's years, but also demonstrated how the children had processed their trauma in healthy ways through therapy, family discussions, and the security of knowing they were genuinely wanted and valued. Speaking of family, Jake said, reaching for an envelope he had placed on the counter, "We received some news yesterday that I wanted to share with all of you." The children leaned forward with interest as Jake opened the envelope and revealed official-looking documents. Benjamin Crawford was sentenced yesterday for child endangerment and neglect. He'll serve 2 years in prison and will never have any legal claim to contact any of you again. The news brought visible relief to the older children, who had been carrying some anxiety about the possibility of Benjamin attempting to reclaim custody or seek revenge for their rescue. Emma, in particular, had struggled with guilt over her relief that Benjamin was out of their lives permanently. "Emma, I can see you're still working through complicated feelings about Benjamin," Jake observed gently. "Remember what Dr. Martinez taught us about processing difficult emotions. It's okay to feel relief that someone who hurt you can't hurt you anymore." Dr. Sophia Martinez, the family therapist who had been working with them since the early days of their transition, had helped all of them understand that healing from trauma involved accepting complex emotions rather than judging themselves for natural responses to abuse and neglect. "Dad," Rachel said quietly, "do you think our real parents would be happy about our new family? Sometimes I worry that we're forgetting them by being happy with you." The question touched the core of grief, work that had been ongoing for all the children. Jake had learned to honor their memories of their deceased parents while helping them understand that loving new family members didn't diminish their love for those they had lost. "Rachel, I believe your parents would be incredibly proud of how you've taken care of each other and how you've built a new life while keeping their memory alive," Jake said with certainty. "Love doesn't have limits. The more we have, the more we're capable of giving and receiving." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Chen, Jake's business partner who had become like an aunt to the children. Sarah's role in coordinating their rescue and supporting their family formation had created bonds that extended their family beyond the immediate household. "Good morning, Morrison family," Sarah announced cheerfully, carrying a bag of fresh pastries from the local bakery. "Are we ready for the big first day of school?" The children greeted Sarah with enthusiasm that reflected how naturally they had expanded their understanding of family to include people who demonstrated genuine care and support. Sarah had been instrumental in helping Jake navigate the complexities of sudden parenthood, offering both practical assistance and emotional support during challenging transitions. "Sarah, will you be here for our after-school celebration?" asked Tommy, his natural openness having returned as he learned to trust that adults in his life were reliable and kind. "I wouldn't miss it," Sarah assured him. "Jake won't tell me what the surprise is, but he's been working on something special for weeks." The surprise Jake had planned was actually a combination of several elements that reflected how well he had learned to understand his children's interests and needs. The backyard now featured a playground designed with input from all 8 children, including adaptive equipment that would accommodate any future foster siblings they might welcome into their family. More importantly, Jake had arranged for the entire extended family, including Dr. Hendricks, Dr. Martinez, Judge Walsh, and several teachers from their new school to attend a celebration that would officially welcome the children into their new community while acknowledging the journey they had traveled together. "All right, family, time to head to school," Jake announced, gathering car keys and the backpacks that each child had helped select during their shopping trips for school supplies. The process of preparing for school had become a family adventure that emphasized each child's individual interests while maintaining their group identity. The drive to Glacier Ridge Elementary School took them through the town that had embraced their unconventional family with remarkable warmth and support. Local businesses had contributed to their back-to-school preparations. Teachers had volunteered for summer tutoring, and community members had offered everything from babysitting to transportation assistance. "Dad, look," Emma said from the passenger seat, pointing to a banner stretched across the school's entrance that read "Welcome Patterson Morrison Family." The hyphenated name reflected their decision to honor both their original family identity and their new family structure. The sight of the banner brought tears to Jake's eyes as he realized how completely their community had accepted and celebrated their family formation. What had begun as his solo rescue mission had evolved into a community-supported transformation that benefited everyone involved. As they pulled into the school parking lot, Jake could see teachers and administrators waiting to welcome the children. Personally, Principal Margaret Torres had spent hours coordinating with therapists and specialists to ensure that each child's educational experience would support their continued healing and growth. "Remember, kids," Jake said as they prepared to enter the school, "you're not just starting school today, you're beginning the next chapter of your adventure. As the Patterson-Morrison family, you have each other, you have me, and you have an entire community that's rooting for your success." The children gathered around Jake for their traditional family hug, a ritual that had evolved during their months together as a way of reinforcing their bonds before facing new challenges. In that moment, surrounded by 8 children who had taught him that love could indeed transform any circumstance, Jake Morrison understood that his Christmas Eve rescue mission had actually been his own salvation. "We love you, Dad," Emma said, speaking for all of them as they prepared to walk into their new school as confident, supported children rather than survivors of trauma. "I love you too," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Now go show the world what the Patterson-Morrison family is capable of achieving." As Jake watched his 8 children walk confidently into their new school, welcomed by teachers who had prepared specifically for their unique needs, and surrounded by classmates who had been educated about inclusion and kindness, he reflected on the miracle that had begun with a blizzard and a desperate rescue mission. The man who had ventured into an impossible storm to save 8 children he had never met had discovered that he was actually the one who needed saving. Jake Morrison had found his purpose, his family, and his future in 8 remarkable children who had taught him that the greatest rescues weren't about saving people from external dangers, they were about creating the conditions where everyone could thrive. Christmas Eve, 6 months ago, had brought Jake Morrison through the worst blizzard in Montana history to find 8 children who needed a miracle. What he had discovered was that he needed the miracle just as much as they did. Together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, a family built on love, respect, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves the chance to be cherished exactly as they are. The Christmas blizzard that had trapped 8 orphans with a cruel stepfather had indeed delivered Santa's gift, not just in the form of rescue, but in the form of a love that would last forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.